I'm Jessica Denson, and you are watching a special edition of Lights On with Jessica Denson. This is a special Sunday live. I do not usually do live spur of the moment like this, but I frankly was inspired to last night after watching Kamala Harris's full interview with Stephen Colbert. So many things came to me listening to her responses in this interview. And so many of you have asked me to comment on this very popular Substack about an ex-CIA whistleblower going on the record to say the NSA audited the 2024 election. Kamala Harris won. So I really just had so many threads to share with you about the connection that I saw in this new reporting, as well as what we have been reporting on Lights On for so long about knowing that this election was anything but free and fair, and some kind of really deep introspection and humility that I've had just over the past day about love and gratitude and self-worth, and how the power, the transformative power of love can really free us from this awful injustice that we are suffering as a nation right now. So there is going to be a healthy dose of soul and spirituality in this episode that comes from a deep place, as I mentioned, of humility and introspection. So if that's not your cup of tea, you can pass now to the next video. I won't be offended, but that is what I really believe will get us out of this. And Kamala Harris spoke a lot about that last night, about God, about prayer, about our own power. So many of the themes that she was repeating so much during the campaign, and that clearly resonated with the majority of this country. So you have a special, different episode of Lights On that you're tuning into right now. Let me start with the article that is on Substack, on the Substack page. This will hold, just to read the cover of the lead on this. It is, quote, "In December 2024, I was personally involved in an NSA-authorized forensic audit of the 2024 election." Now, this is the claim by a man named Adam Zarnowski, an ex-CIA agent and the author of a book called Jormungandr, which is about human trafficking and his work in that field. He says, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz won by a wide margin. Trump lost dramatically. There are multiple layers of complexity to this cover-up, including transactional organized crime syndicates that extend far beyond the United States and our elections. To that point, I work in the human trafficking sector, which intersects with the stolen elections and has ties to Trump and Epstein, not to President Biden, Vice President Harris, or Governor Walz, but to the Democrats and other allied interests responsible for burying the audit. Now, that is obviously it's a bombshell claim to make. And I will tell you that I have done some preliminary cross-checks with other cybersecurity experts that I know, and just asked them to give me, election security experts, forgive me, to give me their feedback on that claim. And I will tell you, one of the responses that I got was that there's a little bit of a question as to his claim that a forensic audit was done, since there have not been any hand count of audits. There have not been any retention of the actual voting machines to conduct a forensic audit. So they had a little bit of a question as to how a forensic audit could have been conducted by the NSA. That said, if you proceed through this Substack article, you will see that Adam is calling himself for a hand recount and really raising the urgency of needing to probe this issue further, which is what I'm going to talk about when I get to the Stephen Colbert interview with Kamala Harris. We really absolutely have to address this. We cannot let this go. We must address it if we ever have any hope, as I've said countless times, of having a legitimate election in this country. Again, the article goes on to list the vulnerabilities of our voting machines, in particular the ES and S operated voting machines that are prolific in this country, and the vendor that was supposed to mitigate any software vulnerabilities in these machines and did not do that. And this is reiterated in this article, but this is not new reporting. This has been known for quite some time. Some of the cybersecurity experts and election security experts I've had on this program in the past have told me that clearly, including Susan Greenhall, the election security advisor for Free Speech for People, Duncan Buell, who leads the computer science department at the University of South Carolina. Both of them were on a letter that was penned to Kamala Harris in November of this year. It's the reason I left Midas Touch, to be able to have this conversation with Clarity, when they were pleading with Kamala Harris just to conduct recounts, because they knew that the voting machines had not been secured after Donald Trump and his co-conspirators gained access to these machines after the 2020 election. The necessary safeguards were never done to these machines, and all kinds of misconceptions as to our elections being secure were so secure and impenetrable were out there, in particular because any mention of the notion that we might have to do better election hygiene was wrongfully conflated with the efforts of Trump and MAGA in 2020 to claim a stolen election, when it in fact was not, and when they in fact had countless recounts, countless audits, and did everything under the sun to be able to see that Biden did in fact win that, and they wouldn't even take that as a result. As we know, instead, Donald Trump led a deadly insurrection. So frankly, I do have more digging to do on the Substack article, but I will tell you, with or without doing that, I already know. I already know from all of the work that I have done reporting on this show, from all of the experts I have talked to, from all of the data scientists who are looking at the voting irregularities and anomalies in voting behavior, from others such as Greg Palast, who I have had on the program talking about the massive voter suppression, where he explained to me that if all legal ballots were counted and all legal voters were allowed to vote, Trump would have lost the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Harris would have won the presidency with 286 electoral votes. She did not, because according to Greg Palast, who is an independent journalist who has worked for The Guardian, BBC, many other highly reputable outlets, and has dug deep into the issue of voter suppression. He says that if not for the mass purge of voters of color, if not for the mass disqualification of provisional and mail-in ballots, if not for the new mass vigilante challenges in swing states, which is the subject of his documentary, Vigilantes, Inc., Harris would have gained at least another 3,565,000 votes, topping Trump's official popular vote tally by 1.2 million. 1.2 million, at least, just on the issue of voter suppression, even leaving all of the other data manipulation that is highly likely to have occurred out of the picture. There's also other individuals, such as a man named David Rodriguez, who has gone to great lengths to investigate what appears to be a massive discrepancy in the amount of registered voters before the election and after the election. He says just prior to 2024, November of 2024, it was reported that there were nearly 18 million new registered voters in the US since the 2022 midterms, yet that increase in registered voters appears to have completely vanished after the election. What happened? He goes on to write about how the disappearance of mail-in ballots is a very possible likelihood. And there were reputable, credible, completely mainstream news organizations reporting, you remember this, the most strange anomalies with ballots being discovered on the side of a road or down a creek. He really delves into what could have happened with the mail-in votes, and how this situation in particular with mail-in votes would not even be discovered with a recount or an audit, because they would not have ever reached the polling place. I have always believed that it was a mass assault on this election, that they were coming at it from every angle, that Donald Trump had so much to lose there, and the forces that were depending on him, those those billionaires and those people that are so desperate to hold on to their own wealth. Money can't buy happiness, folks. And just enrich themselves at all costs, that knew they would get Donald Trump to do their bidding. That cynicism, that zero-sum game playbook, those people and those forces were so invested in getting him elected, not to mention Trump himself, to stay out of jail for all the crimes that he committed, that they would pull out all the stops to make that happen. And I absolutely believe that they did. Now, when I was watching the interview with Kamala Harris on Stephen Colbert, I had so many thoughts, and I addressed this a little bit on Friday, but as I watched the full interview, so many more things came to me. At one point, she said to Stephen Colbert, she said she would pray every night and ask God, I hope I have done everything I could do today. I hope I have done everything I could do today. And as I was listening to her say that, I know there are so many of us out here who loved Kamala Harris. And I've spoken very clearly about how I was her biggest cheerleader, notwithstanding massive differences on the positions she took, for instance, on Israel and Gaza, and not distancing herself further from the Biden administration's failures on that subject. But I knew she was the clearly preferable alternative, and that democracy would be safe generally in her hands, for God's sake, as did the country, as did the masses that were filling up those stadiums while Donald Trump couldn't fill up a high school auditorium. All of us that felt that energy and did not feel right when we saw those 7 swing states go to Donald Trump on election night before we went to sleep, were pleading with her campaign to do something. That letter from the cybersecurity experts and election security experts was pleading with her to do a recount, just call for a recount, not storm the Capitol, just call for a recount. And I am almost doing this show as a real plea to Kamala Harris still, because she still has a platform. She still has people that are looking to her for leadership. You just listen to that interview and see the kind of rousing applause that she gets from the audience. And I'm reminded of how much, for the most part, I really loved her as a candidate, and how much genuine love for this country you could feel in her. There are so many people that think she did not do enough, that her campaign did not do enough, that they did not, as she likes to say over and over again, never let anybody take your power from you. And she said it again to Stephen Colbert. They feel like she let Donald Trump and this insane criminal tyranny take her power from her, and as a result, our power from us. So I'm kind of doing this episode as an exercise in grace, in knowing that this is a woman who has accomplished so much, who is looking to still be a force for good in this world, albeit not as a candidate, which I can definitely relate to, having never wanted as a young child to even enter politics at all. This is what she needs to do. She needs to start answering these questions that her voters, those people who she talks about seeing the joy in their eyes, seeing the neighbors who were from such different backgrounds, finding common cause in her campaign because the campaign was such a source of light. She owes it to those people to acknowledge these reports now, to acknowledge the cybersecurity experts. Kamala Harris's own words in her book years ago, when she was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, talking about how she knew how easy it was to hack voting machines. She describes a scenario with Alex Halderman, one of the leading hackers in the country, coming in to the Senate to brief them on how easy it was to hack voting machines, and the Republicans, in particular, in Trump's administration in 2017, completely steamrolled efforts to make voting machines more secure. I wonder why. There was a report in 2016 that Russia had hacked into the 2016 election from the CIA. Why would the Republicans be so opposed to securing these machines? But they were, and Donald Trump essentially killed that effort in his first administration. And then, in clear projecting fashion, as he always does, claimed in 2020 that his opponents were engaged in the activity that he would be engaged in 4 years later, if not already in 2020, and if not Republicans having been engaged in this for years before. And I actually don't think it's exclusively Republicans. I think that there probably have been corrupt actors on both sides, which is also probably another reason for some of the silence that you've seen on this issue, because the corruption is not exclusive. Well, I think it largely lies with the Republicans. I do not think it is exclusive to them, which Adam in that Substack references as well, while not implicating Harris and Biden directly, others in the sphere. So if you really want to do everything that you can do, Ms. Harris, Vice President, and everything that all of those people put their faith in you for, and respect, for goodness sakes, what you accomplished, pay attention to this conversation. It's never too late to admit that you are wrong, or to admit that you didn't do something that you needed to do. I'm telling you that this country will give you the grace to admit that and come forward and have that conversation now. And frankly, any lawmaker to come forward and give this conversation a platform, at least to engage with it, to not pretend it doesn't exist. Even in the Stephen Colbert interview, she was talking about a picture in her book where she's sitting on the day that she hears that Joe Biden is going to drop out of the election. And she's got wired headphones instead of AirPods in. And she's like, you see me there in my wired headphones, which I prefer, because I know, as a former member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I'm paraphrasing her, how easily AirPods can be hacked. And if you think that you're sitting on a train with AirPods and someone can't listen into your conversation, think again. Okay, she said that just in the interview on Thursday. This woman knows that hacking is so possible and that these machines were not secured. So have this conversation now. Have this conversation now. There are some people that believe, and I know there was a lot of this belief between November and January, before January 6th, before January 20th. Everybody thought that there was some master plan where, who knows, NATO or military or somebody was going to come out and save us, because they were all just keeping some secret for us and waiting for somebody to swoop in and say, you're right, the election was stolen and now we're coming back into power. I got to tell you, I do not believe that that is the current state of anybody in the Kamala Harris camp, including Kamala Harris herself. I do not believe that for one second. But I do believe that we can gracefully but urgently pressure her and Democrats in power, who have been so reluctant to have this conversation, to have it now, and let them know what a betrayal, frankly, it was and is, if they will not have this conversation, and that they are essentially preventing us from ever being able to have a free and fair election again if they will not take the leadership position on this. Because God knows Donald Trump and his allies, who will do anything to stay in power. They launched a deadly insurrection last time, will do anything to stay in power. We know for sure that they will not be having it. So this is on you. It's on you, Democrats. It's on you, Kamala Harris. Have this conversation on your book tour. Come on Lights On and talk to me. I will have a loving and graceful but direct and needed conversation with you about what happened in the 2024 election. You were not wrong. when you felt that joy and that love and that incredible power in those stadiums that you filled. You were not wrong. She talked about January 6th. And if you're not a stranger to Lights On, you know that we started the protest movement of this illegal administration back on January 3rd with 14th Now by demanding that lawmakers invoke Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to reject Trump's presidency as illegal as it is. It is unconstitutional to this day. And she talked about certifying the election of the so-called election of Trump, even if we take it at face value, this certifying that election, and how it was somehow an exercise in the peaceful transfer of power. And the audience clapped for her, and Stephen Colbert congratulated her and commended her, I should say. And I, of course, brought myself back to that day and knowing what a straw man distraction it was to think for 1 second that certifying the election of a man who violated the peaceful transfer of power was engaging in the peaceful transfer of power. That was not an honorable thing to do. That was not a, oh my gosh, that was not a dignified thing to do. That was not something that restored any kind of sanity or law or order to our country. You only have to look at the unbelievable damage and cruelty and sabotage of our Constitution and law that this man and his illegal presidency have done since they took power to know there was nothing peaceful about letting him in violation of our Constitution. She said later in the interview, she said, Stephen Colbert asked her, is there anything that surprises you about how bad this administration is, more or less? And she said to him, she wasn't surprised by how bad Trump in 2025 and all the things they were trying to do was or is. She, of course, warned us all about it many times, as did I and so many people. But she said she was surprised about the people who considered themselves guardians just capitulating. And I thought, Madam Vice President, you may not understand this or see it, but you capitulated too. You capitulated by not calling for recounts. And who knows? I believe this woman to be genuine. I don't know. Maybe she was so crowded out by other advisors, other influences that who knows? Maybe those letters didn't get to her. That's why I thought it was such a gross negligence that networks like Midas Touch with the platform that they had would not amplify that conversation. And I did everything in my power to do so. Imagine if everybody was like me, and was the networks and the independent so-called media organizations, and everybody was amplifying the calls for Kamala Harris and her campaign to have recounts. Imagine. Then it would have certainly reached her. But I'm not entirely sure it did reach her. So, and I'm not even entirely sure that Miss Kamala Harris or any number of the Democrats who voted to certify this election were aware of their legal authority to reject Trump's electors on January 6th. Once again, I used my entire platform for a month to do my best as one woman to educate the public about why, in spite of the ruling in Trump v. Anderson, Donald Trump was still disqualified and still needed to be banned from office. And nothing in that ruling prevented Congress from rejecting his electors on January 6th. In fact, it was their constitutional duty to do so, and every one of them abandoned it. But I'm not even sure that most of those lawmakers understood that. I'm not sure. We have to have these conversations now. We cannot continue to pretend on a daily basis like Donald Trump is running a legitimate administration. Every time I hear somebody say, after he does some insane, cruel thing, some illegal, brazen, egregious act, well, this is what the people voted for. no, this is not what the people voted for. An ex-CIA whistleblower, an investigative journalist, multiple cybersecurity and election security experts, data analysts. I could go on and on, not to mention the average clear-thinking American who saw the state of our country before this election, the threat that we knew Donald Trump to pose, his mental decline, his criminality, all that we had collectively suffered from this man and his assaults, his predatory nature, that we didn't have the common sense to make sure he was never elected again? I don't think so. We did have it. Yes, there are people in this country that are brainwashed. There are millions of them, far, far too many. But we are many, many more than that. So this is my call to anybody in power right now to have bold strokes of moral courage, as Mary Baker Eddy says, to let love, true love, both self-respect, respect for yourself that results in respect for your constituents and for the people and for the Constitution. Let that be the liberator that sets us free from this egregious, vile nightmare that we seem to be all living. And for each one of us to have gratitude for what we have done individually, what our country has done, and to let that gratitude be a prayer that brings these things into our experience. I know this sounds metaphysical. I'm trying to share it in the most simple way I can with you, but this is my life. I'm telling you, this is the reason I have anything at all, that I have anything to share with you, is because I turn to a higher power for answers. So I'm going to share with you one other thing that I love so much. This is from an article from the early 1900s called The New Woman. And since we talked so much about Kamala Harris today and what she could do and what, frankly, she already did, I'm going to read this to you. This is from over 100 years ago, but as relevant right this moment as ever before. It says, in olden times, it was the Amazons who conquered the invincibles, and we must now look to their daughters to overcome our own allied armies of evil and to save us from ourselves. She must and will succeed, for as David sang, God shall help her, and that right early. Woman must not and will not be disheartened by 1,000 denials or 1,000,000 of broken pledges. With the assurance of faith she prays, with the certainty of inspiration she works, and with the patience of genius she waits. At last she is becoming as fair as the morn, as bright as the sun, and as terrible as an army with banners to those who march under the black flag of oppression and wield the ruthless sword of injustice. All right. So let us be that terrible army to injustice. Thank you so much for joining me on this special live episode of Lights On. I know it was different, but I really it came to you from me and from my heart. And I hope that it blesses you. And I hope that it is a light to get us out of this situation. You can find all things Jessica Denson at thejessicadenson.com. Support my work at thejessicadenson.com/donate and buy shirts like this one at thejessicadenson.com or at the links below. Thank you so much, everyone.